The iterator was sitting in a stilt chair, examining ancient texts secured on one of the high shelves of the archive's gloomiest back annexes. There was no bustle of activity back here, no hurrying servitors laden with requested books. Loken presumed that the material catalogued in this area was of little interest to the average scholar. Cinderman didn't hear him approach. He was intently studying a fragile old manuscript. The stilt chair's reading lamp tilted over his left shoulder to illuminate the pages. "Hello," Loken hissed. Cinderman looked down and saw Loken. He stared slightly, as if woken from a deep sleep. "Garvio," he whispered. "One moment." Cinderman put the manuscript back on the shelf, but several other books were piled up in the chair's basket rack. As he re-shelved the manuscript, Cinderman's hand seemed to tremble. He pulled a brass lever on the chair's armrest, and the stilt legs telescoped down with a breathy hiss until he was at ground level. Loken reached out to steady the iterator as he stepped out of the chair. "Thank you, Garvio." "What are you doing back here?" Loken asked. "Oh, you know, reading." "Reading what?" Cinderman cast what Loken judged to be a slightly guilty look at the books in his chair's rack. Guilty or embarrassed. "I confess," Cinderman said, "I have been seeking solace in some old and terribly unfashionable material. Pre-unification fiction, and some poetry. Just desolate scraps. For so little remains, but I find some comfort in it." "May I?" Loken asked, gesturing to the basket. "Of course," said Cinderman. Loken sat down in the brass chair, which creaked under his weight, and took some of the old books out of the side basket to examine them. They were frayed and foxed, even though some of them had evidently been rebound or sleeved from earlier bindings prior to archiving. "The golden age of Sumaturan poetry," Loken said. "Folk tales of old Muscovy. What's this? The Chronicles of Ursh. Boisterous fictions and bloody histories, with the occasional smattering of fine lyric verse." Loken took out another heavy book. "Tyranny of the Pan-Pacific," he read, and flipped open the cover to see the title page. "An epic poem in 9 cantos, exalting the rule of Nath and Duma. It sounds rather dry. It's raw-headed and robust, and quite bawdy in parts. The work of overexcited poets trying to turn the matter of their own wretched times into myth. I'm rather fond of it. I used to read such things as a child. Fairy tales from another time." "A better time?" Cinderman balked. "Oh, Terra, no. An awful time. A murderous, rancorous age when we were sliding into species doom, not knowing that the Emperor would come and apply the brakes to our cultural plummet." "But they comfort you." "They remind me of my boyhood. That comforts me." "Do you need comforting?" Loken asked, putting the books back in the basket and looking up at the old man. "I've barely seen you since the mountains," Cinderman finished, with a sad smile. "Indeed. I've been to the school on several occasions to hear you brief the iterators, but always there's someone standing in for you. How are you?" Cinderman shrugged. "I confess, I've been better. Your injuries still." "I've healed in body, Garvio, but..." Cinderman tapped his temple with a gnarled finger. "I'm unsettled. I haven't felt much like speaking. The fire's not in me just now. It will return. I've kept my own company, and I'm on the mend." Loken stared at the old iterator. He seemed so frail, like a baby bird, pale and skinny-necked. It had been 9 weeks since the bloodshed at the Whisperheads, and most of that time they had spent in warp transit. Loken felt he had begun to come to terms with things himself, but seeing Cinderman, he realized how close to the surface the hurt lay. He could block it out. He was Astartes, but Cinderman was a mortal man, and nothing like as resilient. "I wish I could." Cinderman held up a hand. "Please." "The War Master himself was kind enough to speak with me about it, privately. I understand what happened, and I'm a wiser man for it." Loken got out of the chair and allowed Cinderman to take his place. The iterator sat down gratefully. "He keeps me close," Loken said. "Who does?" "The War Master. He brought me and the 10th with him on this undertaking just to keep me by him. So he could watch me. Because? Because I've seen what few have seen. Because I've seen what the warp can do if we're not careful. Then our beloved commander is very wise, Gaviel. Not only has he given you something to occupy your mind with, he's offering you the chance to reforge your courage in battle. He still needs you." Sinderman got to his feet again and limped along the book stacks for a moment, tracing his thin hand across the spines. From his gait, Loken knew he hadn't healed anything like as well as he'd claimed. He seemed occupied with the books once more. Loken waited for a moment. "I should go," he said. "I have duties to attend to." Sinderman smiled and waved Loken on his way with eyelash blinks of his fingers. "I've enjoyed talking with you again," Loken said. "It's been too long." "It has." "I'll come back soon. A day or two. Hear your brief, perhaps." "I might be up to that." Loken took a book out of the basket. "These comfort you, you say?" "Yes." "May I borrow one?" "If you bring it back." "What have you there?" Sinderman shuffled over and took the volume from Loken. "Sumaturan poetry. I don't think that's you. Try this." He took one of the other books out of the chair's rack. "The Chronicles of Ush. 40 chapters detailing the savage reign of Callaghan. You'll enjoy that. Very bloody, with a high body count. Leave the poetry to me." Loken scanned the old book and then put it under his arm. "Thanks for the recommendation. If you like poetry, I have some for you." "Really?" "One of the remembrances." "Oh, yes." Sinderman nodded. "Carcassy. I was told you'd vouched for him." "It was a favor to a friend." "And by friend, you mean Mercedes Ollerton?" Loken laughed. "You told me you'd kept your own company these last few months, yet you still know everything about everything. That's my job. The juniors keep me up to speed." "I understand you've indulged her a little, as your own remembrancer." "Is that wrong?" "Not at all," Sinderman smiled. "That's the way it's supposed to work. Use her, Gaviel. Let her use you. One day, perhaps, there will be far finer books in the Imperial archives than these poor relics." Carcassy was going to be sent away. I arranged probation, and part of that was for him to submit all his work to me. I can't make head nor tail of it. Poetry. I don't do poetry. Can I give it to you? Of course. Loken turned to leave. What was the book you put back? He asked. What? When I arrived, you had volumes in your basket there, but you were also studying one intently, it seemed to me. You put it back on the shelves. What was it? Bad poetry, said Sinderman. The fleet had embarked for murder less than a week after the Whisperheads incident. The transmitted requests for assistance had become so insistent that any debate as to what the 63rd Expedition undertook next became academic. The War Master had ordered the immediate departure of 10 companies under his personal command, leaving Varvarus behind with the bulk of the fleet to oversee the general withdrawal from 6319. Once 10th Company had been chosen as part of the relief force, Loken had found himself too occupied with the hectic preparations for transit to let his mind dwell on the incident. It was a relief to be busy. There were squad formations to be reassigned, and replacements to be selected from the Legion's novitiate and scout auxiliaries. He had to find men to fill the gaps in Hellebore and Breakspur, and that meant screening young candidates and making decisions that would change lives forever. Who were the best? Who should be given the chance to advance to full Astartes status? Togaden and Aximand assisted Loken in this solemn task, and he was thankful for their contributions. Little Horus, in particular, seemed to have extraordinary insight regarding candidates. He saw true strengths in some that Loken would have dismissed, and flaws in others that Loken liked the look of. Loken began to appreciate that Aximand's place in the Mournival had been earned by his astonishing analytical precision. Loken had elected to clear out the dormitory cells of the dead men himself. "Vipers and I can do that," Torgadden said. "Don't bother yourself." "I want to do it," Loken replied. "I should do it." "Let him, Tarek," said Aximand. "He's right. He should." Loken found himself truly warming to little Horus for the first time. He had not imagined they would ever be close, but what had at first seemed to be quiet, reserved, and stern in little Horus Aximand was proving to be plain-spoken, empathic, and wise. When he came to clean out the modest Spartan cells, Loken made a discovery. The warriors had little in the way of personal effects, some clothing, some select trophies, and little, tightly bound scrolls of oath papers, usually stored in canvas cargo sacks beneath their crude cots. Amongst Xavier Jubal's meager effects, Loken found a small silver medal, unmounted on any chain or cord. It was the size of a coin, a wolf's head set against a crescent moon. "What is this?" Loken asked Nero Vipers, who had come along with him. "I can't say, Garvey." "I think I know what it is," Loken said, a little annoyed at his friend's blank response. "And I think you do too." "I really can't say." "Then guess," Loken snapped. Vipers suddenly seemed very caught up in examining the way the flesh of his wrist was healing around the augmetic implant he had been fitted with. "Nero." "It could be a lodge medal, Garvey," Vipers replied dismissively. "I can't say for sure." "That's what I thought," Loken said. He turned the silver medal over in his palm. "Jubal was a lodge member then, eh?" "So what if he was?" "You know my feelings on the subject," Loken replied. Officially, there were no warrior lodges, or any other kind of fraternities within the Adeptus Astartes. It was common knowledge that the Emperor frowned on such institutions, claiming they were dangerously close to cults, and only a step away from the imperial creed, the Lectitio Divinitatus, that supported the notion of the Emperor, beloved by all, as a god. But fraternal lodges did exist within the Astartes, occult and private. According to rumors, they had been active in the 16th Legion for a long time. Some 6 decades earlier, the Lunar Wolves, in collaboration with the 17th Legion, the Word-Bearers, had undertaken the compliance of a world called Davin. A feral place, Davin had been controlled by a remarkable warrior caste, whose savage nobility had won the respect of the Astartes sent to pacify their warring feuds. The Davinite warriors had ruled their world through a complex structure of warrior lodges, quasi-religious societies that had venerated various local predators. By cultural osmosis, the lodge practices had been quietly absorbed by the legions. Loken had once asked his mentor, Sinderman, about them. "They're harmless enough," the Iterate had told him. "Warriors always seek the brotherhood of their kind. As I understand it, they seek to promote fellowship across the hierarchies of command, irrespective of rank or position. A kind of internal bond, a ribwork of loyalty that operates, as it were, perpendicular to the official chain of command." Loken had never been sure what something that operated perpendicular to the chain of command might look like, but it sounded wrong to him. Wrong, if nothing else, in that it was deliberately secret, and thus deceitful. Wrong in that the Emperor, beloved by all, disapproved of them. "Of course," Sinderman had added, "I can't actually say if they exist." Real or not, Loken had made it plain that any Astartes intending to serve under his captaincy should have nothing to do with them. There had never been any sign that anyone in the 10th was involved in lodge activities. Now, the medal had turned up. A lodge medal, belonging to the man who had turned into a demon and killed his own. Loken was greatly troubled by the discovery. He told Vipers that he wanted it made known that any man in his command who had information concerning the existence of lodges should come forwards and speak with him, privately if necessary. The next day, when Loken came to sort through the personal effects he had gathered one last time, he found the medal had disappeared. In the last few days before departure, Mercedy Ollerton had come to him several times, pleading Carcass's case. Loken remembered her talking to him about it on his return from the Whisperheads, but he had been too distracted then. He cared little about the fate of a remembrancer, especially one foolish enough to anger the expedition authorities. But it was another distraction, and he needed as many as he could get. After consulting with Malagurst, he told her he would intervene. Ignace Carcassy was a poet, and, it appeared, an idiot. He didn't know when to shut up. On a surface visit to 6319, he had wandered away from the legitimate areas of visit, got drunk, and then shot his mouth off to such an extent he had received a near-fatal beating from a crew of army troopers. "He is going to be sent away," Mercedes said. "Back to Terra, in disgrace. His certification stripped away. It's wrong, Captain. Ignace is a good man." "Really?" "No, all right. He's a lousy man. Uncouth, stubborn, annoying. But he is a great poet. And he speaks the truth, no matter how unpalatable that is. Ignace didn't get beaten up for lying." Recovered enough from his beating to have been transferred from the flagship's infirmary to a holding cell, Ignace Carcassy was a dishevelled, unedifying prospect. He rose as Loken walked in, and the stab lights came on. "Captain, sir," he began, "I am gratified you take an interest in my pathetic affairs." "You have persuasive friends," Loken said. "Ollerton, and Keeler, too." "Captain Loken, I had no idea I had persuasive friends. In point of fact, I had little notion I had friends at all. Mercedes is kind, as I'm sure you've realized. Euphrates, I heard there was some trouble she was caught up in?" "There was." "Is she well? Was she hurt?" "She's fine," Loken replied, although he had no idea what state Keeler was in. He hadn't seen her. She'd sent him a note requesting his intervention in Carcassy's case. Loken suspected Mercedes Ollerton's influence. Ignace Carcassy was a big man, but he had suffered a severe assault. His face was still puffy and swollen, and the bruises had discoloured his skin yellow like jaundice. Blood vessels had burst in his hang-dog eyes. Every movement he made seemed to give him pain. "I understand you're outspoken," Loken said. "Something of an iconoclast." Yes, Carcassy said, shaking his head. "But I'll grow out of it, I promise you." "They want rid of you. They want to send you home," said Loken. "The senior remembrances believe you're giving the Order a bad name." "Captain, I could give someone a bad name just by standing next to them." That made Loken smile. He was beginning to like the man. "I've spoken with the War Master's equerry about you, Carcassy," Loken said. "There is a potential for probation here. If a senior Astarte such as myself vouches for you, then you could stay with the expedition." "There'd be conditions?" Carcassy asked. "Of course there would. But first of all, I have to hear you tell me that you want to stay." "I want to stay. Great terror, Captain. I made a mistake, but I want to stay. I want to be part of this." Loken nodded. "Mercedes says you should. The equerry, too, has a soft spot for you. I think Malagurst likes an underdog." "Sir, never has a dog been so much under." "Here are the conditions," Loken said. "Stick to them, or I will withdraw my sponsorship of you entirely, and you'll be spending a cold 40 months lugging your ass back to Terra. First, you reform your habits." "I will, sir. Absolutely." "Second, you report to me every 3 days, my duties permitting, and copy me with everything you write. Everything. Do you understand? Work intended for publication and idle scribbles. Nothing goes past me. You will show me your soul on a regular basis." "I promise, Captain. Though I warn you, it's an ugly, cross-eyed, crook-backed, club-footed soul." "I've seen ugly," Loken assured him. "The third condition. A question, really. Do you lie?" "No, sir. I don't." "This is what I've heard. You tell the truth, unvarnished and unretouched. You are judged a scoundrel for this. You say things others dare not." Carcassy shrugged, with a groan brought about by sore shoulders. "I'm confused, Captain. Is saying yes to that going to spoil my chances?" "Answer anyway." "Captain Loken, I always tell the truth as I see it, though it gets me beaten to a pulp in army bars. And with my heart, I denounce those who lie or deliberately blur the whole truth." Loken nodded. "What did you say, Remembrancer? What did you say that provoked honest troopers so far they took their fists to you?" Carcassy cleared his throat and winced. "I said I said the Imperium would not endure. I said that nothing lasts forever, no matter how surely it has been built. I said that we will be fighting forever, just to keep ourselves alive. Loken did not reply. Carcassy rose to his feet. Was that the right answer, sir? Are there any right answers, sir? Loken replied. I know this. A warrior officer of the Imperial Fists said much the same thing to me not long ago. He didn't use the same words, but the meaning was identical. He was not sent home. Loken laughed to himself. Actually, as I think of it now, he was, but not for that reason. Loken looked across the cell at Carcassy. The third condition, then. I will vouch for you, and stand in recognizance for you. In return, you must continue to tell the truth. Really? Are you sure about that? Truth is all we have, Carcassy. Truth is what separates us from the Xenos breeds and the traitors. How will history judge us fairly if it doesn't have the truth to read? I was told that was what the Remembrance Order was for. You keep telling the truth, ugly and unpalatable as it might be, and I'll keep sponsoring you. Following his strange and disconcerting conversation with Kirill Sinderman in the archives, Loken walked along to the gallery chamber in the flagship's midships, where the Remembrances had taken to gathering. As usual, Carcassy was waiting for him under the high arch of the chamber's entrance. It was their regular agreed meeting place. From the broad chamber beyond the arch floated sounds of laughter, conversation, and music. Figures, mostly Remembrances, but also some crew personnel and military aides, bustled in and out through the archway, many in noisy, chattering groups. The gallery chamber, one of many aboard the massive flagship designed for large assembly meetings, addresses, and military ceremonies, had been given over to the Remembrances' use once it had been recognized that they could not be dissuaded from social gathering and conviviality. It was most undignified and undisciplined, as if a small carnival had been permitted to pitch in the austere halls of the Grand Warship. All across the Imperium, warships were making similar accommodations as they adjusted to the uncomfortable novelty of carrying large communities of artists and free thinkers with them. By their very nature, the Remembrances could not be regimented or controlled the way the military complements of the ship could. They had an unquenchable desire to meet and debate and carouse. By giving them a space for their own use, the masters of the expedition could at least ring-fence their boisterous activities. The chamber had become known as the Retreat, and it had acquired a grubby reputation. Loken had no wish to go inside, and always arranged to meet Carcassy at the entrance. It felt so odd to hear unrestrained laughter and jaunty music in the solemn depths of the vengeful spirit. Carcassy nodded respectfully as the captain approached him. 7 weeks of voyage time had seen his injuries heal well, and the bruises on his flesh were all but gone. He presented Loken with a printed sheaf of his latest work. Other Remembrances, passing by in little social cliques, eyed the Astartes captain with curiosity and surprise. My most recent work, Carcassy said, as agreed. Thank you. I'll see you here in 3 days. There's something else, Captain, Carcassy said, and handed Loken a data slate. He thumbed it to life. Pics appeared on the screen, beautifully composed pics of him and 10th Company, assembling for embarkation. The banner, the files. Here he was swearing his oath of moment to Targost and Sedere. The Mournival. Euphrate asked me to give you this, Carcassy said. Where is she? Loken asked. I don't know, Captain, Carcassy said. No one's seen her about much. She has become reclusive since... Since? The Whisperheads. What has she told you about that? Nothing, sir. She says there's nothing to tell. She says the first captain told her there was nothing to tell. She's right about that. These are fine images. Thank you, Ignace. Thank Keeler for me. I will treasure these. Carcassy bowed and began to walk back into the retreat. Carcassy. Sir? Look after Keeler, please. For me. You and Ollerton. Make sure she's not alone too often. Yes, Captain, I will. 6 weeks into the voyage, while Loken was drilling his new recruits, Aximand came to him.
"The Chronicles of Ursh,"
he muttered, noticing the volume Loken had left open beside the training mat.
"It pleases me,"
Loken replied.
"I enjoyed it as a child.
Aximand replied.
Vulgar, though."
"I think that's why I like it," Loken replied. "What can I do for you?"
"I wanted to speak to you,"
Aximand said.
"on a private matter."
Loken frowned. Aximand opened his hand and revealed a silver lodge medal.
"I would like you to give this a fair hearing,"
Aximand said, once they had withdrawn to the privacy of Loken's arming chamber.
"as a favor to me.
You know how I feel about lodge activities.
It's been made known to me. I admire your purity, but there's no hidden malice in the lodge. You have my word, and I hope by now that's worth something."
"It is. Who told you of my interest?"
"I can't say."
"Garviel, there is a lodge meeting tonight, and I would like you to attend it as my guest."
"We would like to embrace you to our fraternity."
"I'm not sure I want to be embraced." Aximand nodded his head.
"I understand."
"There would be no duress. Come, attend, see for yourself, and decide for yourself. If you don't like what you find, then you're free to leave and disassociate yourself." Loken made no response.
"It is simply a band of brothers,"
Aximand said.
"a fraternity of warriors, bipartisan and without rank."
"So I've heard."
"Since the Whisperheads, we have had a vacancy. We'd like you to fill it."
"A vacancy," Loken said. "You mean Jabal? I saw his medal."
"Will you come with me?"
asked Aximand.
"I will, because it's you who's asking me,"
said Loken. 4. Their brothers on the tree were already dead, past saving, but Tarvitz could not leave them skewered and unavenged. The ruination of their proud, perfect forms insulted his eyes and the honor of his legion. He gathered all the explosives carried by the remaining men and moved forwards towards the trees with Bull and Sakian. Lucius stayed with the others. "You're a fool to do that," he told Tarvitz. "We might yet need those charges."
"What for?"
Tarvitz asked. Lucius shrugged. "We've a war to win here." That almost made Saul Tarvitz laugh. He wanted to say that they were already dead. Murder had swallowed the companies of blood angels, and now, thanks to Eidolon's zeal for glory, it had swallowed them too. There was no way out. Tarvitz didn't know how many of the company were still alive on the surface, but if the other groups had suffered losses commensurate to their own, the full number could be little higher than 50. 50 men. 50 Astartes, even, against a world of numberless hostiles. This was not a war to win. This was just a last stand, wherein by the Emperor's grace they might take as many of the foe with them as they could before they fell. He did not say this to Lucius, but only because others were in earshot. Lucius's brand of courage admitted no reality, and if Tarvitz had been plain about their situation, it would have led to an argument. The last thing the men needed now was to see their officers quarreling.
"I'll not suffer those trees to stand,"
Tarvitz said. With Bull and Sakian, he approached the white stone trees, running low until they were in under the shadows of their grim, rigid canopies. The winged megarachnid up among the thorns ignored them. They could hear the cracking, clicking noises of the insects feeding, and occasional trickles of black blood spattered down around them. They divided the charges into 3 equal amounts and secured them to the boles of the trees. Bull set a 40-second timer. They began to run back towards the edge of the stalk forest, where Lucius and the rest of the troop lay in cover. "Move it, Saul!" Lucius's voice crackled over the vox. Tarvitz didn't reply. "Move it, Saul! Hurry! Don't look back!" Still running, Tarvitz looked behind him. 2 of the winged clades had disengaged themselves from the feeding group and had taken to the air. Their beating wings were glass blurs in the yellow light, and a lightning flash glinted off their polished black bodies. They circled up away from the thorn trees and came on in the direction of the 3 figures, wings throcking the air like the buzz of a gnat, slowed and amplified to gargantuan bass volumes. "Run!" said Tarvitz. Sakian glanced back. He lost his footing and fell. Tarvitz skidded to a halt and turned back, dragging Sakian to his feet. Bull had run on. 12 seconds, he yelled, turning and drawing his bolter. He kept backing away, but trained his weapon at the oncoming forms. Come on, he yelled. Then he started to fire and shouted, Drop! Drop! Sakian pushed them both down, and he and Tarvitz sprawled onto the red dirt as the first wing clade went over them, so low the downdraft of its whirring wings raised dust. It rose past them and headed straight for Bull, but veered away as he struck it twice with bolter rounds. Tarvitz looked up and saw the second megarachnid drop straight towards him in a near stall, the kind of pounce dive that had snared so many of his comrades earlier. He tried to roll aside. The black thing filled the entire sky. A bolter roared. Sakian had cleared his weapon and was firing upwards, point blank. The shots tore through the wing clade's thorax in a violent puff of smoke and chitin shards, and the thing fell, crushing them both beneath its weight. It twitched and spasmed on top of them, and Tarvitz heard Sakian cry out in pain. Tarvitz scrabbled to heave it away, his hands sticky with its ichor. The charges went off. The shock wave of flame rushed out across the red dirt in all directions. It scorched and demolished the nearby edge of the stalk forest, and lifted Tarvitz, Sakian, and the thing pinning them into the air. It blew Bull off his feet, throwing him backwards. It caught the flying thing, tore off its wings, and hurled it into the thickets. The blast leveled the 3 stone trees. They collapsed like buildings, like demolished towers, fracturing into brittle splinters and white dust as they fell into the fireball. 2 or 3 of the winged clades feeding on the trees took off, but they were on fire, and the heat suck of the explosion tumbled them back into the flames. Tarvitz got up. The trees had been reduced to a heap of white slag, burning furiously. A thick pall of ash-white dust and smoke rolled off the blast zone. Burning, smouldering scads like volcanic outthrow drizzled down over him. He hauled Sakian upright. The creature's impact on them had broken Sakian's right upper arm, and that break had been made worse when they had been thrown by the blast. Sakian was unsteady, but his gen-enhanced metabolism was already compensating. Bull, unhurt, was getting up by himself. The Vox stirred. It was Lucius. "Happy now?" he asked. Beyond revenge and honor, Tarvitz's action had 2 unexpected consequences. The second did not become evident for some time, but the first was apparent in less than 30 minutes. Where the Vox had failed to link the scattered forces on the surface, the blast succeeded. 2 other troops, one commanded by Captain Antaeus, the other by Lord Eidolon himself, detected the considerable detonation and followed the smoke plume to its source. United, they had almost 50 Astartes between them. "Make report to me," Eidolon said. They had taken up position at the edge of the clearing, some half a kilometre from the destroyed trees, near the hem of the stalk forest. The open ground afforded them ample warning of the approach of the megarachnid scurrier-clades, and if the winged forms reappeared, they could retreat swiftly into the cover of the thickets and mount a defence. Tarvitz outlined all that had befallen his troop since landfall as quickly and clearly as possible. Lord Eidolon was one of the Primarch's most senior commanders, the first chosen to such a role, and brooked no familiarity, even from senior line officers like Tarvitz. Saul could tell from his manner that Eidolon was seething with anger. The undertaking had not gone at all to his liking. Tarvitz wondered if Eidolon might ever admit he was wrong to have ordered the drop. He doubted it. Eidolon, like all the elite hierarchy of the Emperor's children, somehow made pride a virtue. "Repeat what you said about the trees," Eidolon prompted. "The winged forms use them to secure prey for feeding, Lord," Tarvitz said. "I understand that," Eidolon snapped. "I've lost men to the winged things, and I've seen the thorn trees. But you say there were other bodies?" "The corpses of blood angels, Lord," Tarvitz nodded. "And men of the Imperial Army force, too." "We've not seen that," Captain Antaeus remarked. "It might explain what happened to them," Eidolon replied. Antaeus was one of Eidolon's chosen circle and enjoyed a far more cordial relationship with his lord than Tarvitz did. "Have you proof?" Antaeus asked Tarvitz. "I destroyed the trees, as you know, sir," Tarvitz said. "So you don't have proof?"
My word is proof, said Tarvitz.
And good enough for me. Antaeus nodded courteously. I meant no offence, brother.
And I took none, sir.
You used all your charges? Eidolon asked.
Yes, Lord.
A waste? Tarvitz began to reply, but stifled the words before he could say them. If it hadn't been for his use of the explosives, they wouldn't have reunited. If it hadn't been for his use of the explosives, the ragged corpses of fine emperor's children would have hung from stone gibbets in ignominious disarray. I told him so, Lord, Lucius remarked.
Told him what?
That using all our charges was a waste.
What's that in your hand, Captain?
Eidolon asked. Lucius held up the limb blade. You taint us, Antaeus said. Shame on you, using an enemy's claw like a sword.
Throw it away, Captain,
Eidolon said.
I'm surprised at you.
Yes, Lord.
Tarvitz? Yes, my lord. The Blood Angels will require some proof of their fallen. Some relic they can honor. You say shreds of armor hung from those trees? Go and retrieve some. Lucius can help you. My lord, should we not secure this? I gave you an order, Captain. Execute it, please. Or does the honor of our brethren legion mean nothing to you? I only thought to... Did I ask for your counsel? Are you a Lord Commander and privy to the higher links of command? No, Lord. Then get to it, Captain. You too, Lucius. You men, assist them.
The local shield storm had blown out. The sky over the wide clearing was surprisingly clear and pale, as if night was finally falling. Tarvitz had no idea of murder's diurnal cycle. Since they had made planetfall, night and day periods must surely have passed. But in the stalk forests, lit by the storm flare, such changes had been imperceptible. Now it seemed cooler, stiller. The sky was a washed-out beige, with filaments of darkness threading through it. There was no wind, and the flicker of sheet lightning came from many kilometers away. Tarvitz thought he could even glimpse stars up there, in the darker patches of the open sky. He led his party out to the ruins of the trees. Lucius was grumbling, as if it was all Tarvitz's fault.
Shut up, Tarvitz told him in a closed channel. Consider this ample payback for your kiss-ass display to the Lord Commander.
What are you talking about? Lucius asked.
I told him it was a waste, Lord,
Tarvitz answered, mimicking Lucius's words in an unflattering voice.
I did tell you. Yes, you did. But there's such a thing as solidarity. I thought we were friends.
We are friends, Lucius said, hurt.
And that was the act of a friend.
We are the Emperor's children, Lucius said solemnly. We seek perfection. We don't hide our mistakes. You made a mistake. Acknowledging our failures is another step on the road to perfection. Isn't that what our Primarch teaches? Tarvitz frowned. Lucius was right. Primarch Fulgrim taught that only by imperfection could they fail the Emperor, and only by recognizing those failures could they eradicate them. Tarvitz wished someone would remind Eidolon of that key tenet of their legion's philosophy. I made a mistake, Lucius admitted. I used that blade thing. I relished it.
It was Xenos.
Lord Eidolon was right to reprimand me.
I told you it was Xenos. Twice.
Yes, you did. I owe you an apology for that. You were right, Saul. I'm sorry.
Never mind.
Lucius put his hand on Tarvitz's plated arm and stopped him. No, it's not. I'm a fine one to talk. You're always so grounded, Saul. I know I mock you for that. I'm sorry. I hope we're still friends.
Of course.
Your steadfast manner is a true virtue, Lucius said. I become obsessive sometimes in the heat of things. It is an imperfection of my character. Perhaps you can help me overcome it. Perhaps I can learn from you. His voice had that childlike tone in it that had made Tarvitz like him in the first place. Besides, Lucius added, you saved my life. I haven't thanked you for that.
No, you haven't. But there's no need, brother.
Then let's get this done, eh? The other men had waited while Tarvitz and Lucius conducted their private vox-to-vox conversation. The pair hurried over to rejoin them. The men Eidolon had picked to go with them were Bull, Ferost, Loderotten, and Tychus, all men from Tarvis's squad. Eidolon was so clearly punishing the troop it wasn't funny. Tarvitz hated the fact that his men suffered because he was not in favor. And Tarvitz had a feeling they weren't being punished for wasting charges. They were suffering Eidolon's opprobrium because they had achieved more of significance than either of the other groups since the drop. They reached the ruined trees and crunched up the slopes of smouldering white slag. Remnants of stone thorns stuck out of the heap, like the antlers of bull deer, some blackened with charred scraps of flesh. "What do we do?" asked Tychus. Tarvitz sighed and knelt down in the white spoil. He began to sift aside the chalky debris with his gloved hands. "This," he said. They worked for an hour or two. Some kind of night began to fall, and the air temperature dropped sharply as the light drained out of the sky. Stars came out, properly, and distant lightning played across the endless grass forests, ringing the clearing. Immense heat was issuing from the heart of the slag heap, and it made the cold air around them shimmer. They sifted the dusty slag piece by piece, and retrieved 2 battered shoulder plates, both Blood Angel's issue, and an Imperial Army cap. "Is that enough?" asked Loderotten. "Keep going," replied Tarvitz. He looked out across the dim clearing to where Eidolon's force was dug in. "Another hour, maybe, and we'll stop." Lucius found a Blood Angel's helmet. Part of the skull was still inside it. Tychus found a breastplate belonging to one of the lost Emperor's children. "Bring that too," Tarvitz said. Then Ferost found something that almost killed him. It was one of the winged clades, burned and buried, but still alive. As Ferost pulled the calcified cinders away, the crumpled black thing, wingless and ruptured, reared up and stabbed at him with its hooked head crest. Ferost stumbled, fell, and slithered down the slag slope on his back. The clade struggled after him, dragging its damaged body, its broken wing bases vibrating pointlessly. Tarvitz leapt over and slew it with his broadsword. It was so near death and dried out that its body crumpled like paper under his blade, and only a residual ichor, thick like glue, oozed out. "All right?" Tarvitz asked. "Just took me by surprise," Ferost replied, laughing it off. "Watch how you go," Tarvitz warned the others. "Do you hear that?" asked Lucius. It had become very still and dark, like a true and proper nightfall. Amping their helmet acoustics, they could all hear the chittering noise Lucius had detected. In the edges of the thickets, starlight flashed off busy metallic forms. "They're back," said Lucius, looking round at Tarvitz. "Tarvitz to main party," Tarvitz voxed. "Hostile contact in the edges of the forest." "We see it, Captain," Eidolon responded immediately. "Hold your position until we—" The link cut off abruptly, like it was being jammed. "We should go back," Lucius said. "Yes," Tarvitz agreed. A sudden light and noise made them all start. The main party, half a kilometre away, had opened fire. Across the distance, they heard and saw bolters drumming and flashing in the darkness. Distant zinc-grey forms danced and jittered in the strobing light of the gunfire. Eidolon's position had been attacked. "Come on!" Lucius cried. "And do what?" Tarvitz asked. "Wait! Look!" The 6 of them scrambled down into cover on one side of the spoil heap. Megarachnid were approaching from the edges of the forest, their marching grey forms almost invisible except where they caught the starlight and the distant blink of lightning. They were streaming towards the tree mound in their hundreds, in neat, ordered lines. Amongst them, there were other shapes, bigger shapes, massive megarachnid forms. Another clade variant. Tarvitz's party slid down the chalky rubble and backed away into the open, the expanse of the clearing behind them, keeping low. To their right, Lord Eidolon's position was engulfed in loud, furious combat. "What are they doing?" asked Bull. "Look," said Tarvitz. The columns of megarachnid ascended the heap of rubble. Warrior forms, equipped with quad blades, took station around the base on guard. Others mounted the slopes and began to sort the spoil, clearing it with inhuman speed and efficiency. Tarvitz saw warrior forms doing this work, and also clades of a similar design, but which possessed spatulate shovel limbs in place of blades. With minute precision, the megarachnid began to disassemble the rubble heap and carry the loose debris away into the thickets. They formed long mechanical work gangs to do this. The more massive forms, the clades Tarvitz had not seen before, came forwards. They were super-heavy monsters with short, thick legs and gigantic abdomens. They moved ponderously and began to gnaw and suck on the loose rubble with ghastly, oversized mouthparts. The smaller clades scurried around their hefty forms, pulling skeins of white matter from their abdominal spinnerets, with curiously dainty, weaving motions of their upper limbs. The smaller clades carried this fibrous, stiffening matter back into the increasingly cleared site and began to plaster it together. "They're rebuilding the trees," Bull whispered. It was an extraordinary sight. The massive clades, weavers, were consuming the broken scraps of the trees Tarvitz had felled and turning them into fresh new material, like gelling concrete. The smaller clades, busy and scurrying, were taking the material and forming new bases with it in the space that others of their kind had cleared. In less than 10 minutes, much of the area had been picked clean, and the trunks of 3 new trees were being formed. The scurrying builders brought limb loads of wet, milk-white matter to the bases, and then regurgitated fluid onto them so as to mix them as cement. Their limbs whirred and shaped like the trowels of master builders. Still, the battle behind them roared. Lucius kept glancing in the direction of the fight. "We should go back," he whispered. "Lord Eidolon needs us." "If he can't win without the 6 of us," Tarvitz said, "he can't win. I felled these trees. I'll not see them built again. Who's with me?" Bull answered, "Aye." So did Ferost, Lodoroton, and Tychus. "Very well," said Lucius. "What do we do?" But Tarvitz had already drawn his broadsword and was charging the megarachnid workers. The fight that followed was simple insanity. The 6 Astartes, blades out, bolters ready, rushed the megarachnid work gangs and made war upon them in the cold night air. Picket clades, warrior forms drawn up as sentinels around the edge of the site, alerted to them first and rushed out in defense. Lucius and Bull met them and slaughtered them, and Tarvitz and Tychus ploughed on into the main site to confront the industrious builder forms. Ferost and Lodoroton followed them, firing wide to fend off flank strikes. Tarvitz attacked one of the monster weaver forms, one of the builder clades, and split its massive belly wide open with his sword. Molten cement poured out like pus, and it began to claw at the sky with its short, heavy limbs. Warrior forms leapt over its stricken mass to attack the Imperials. Tychus shot 2 out of the air, and then decapitated a 3rd as it pounced on him. The megarachnid were everywhere, milling like ants. Lodoroton had slain 8 of them, including another monster clade, when a warrior form bit off his head. As if unsatisfied with that, the warrior form proceeded to flense Lodoroton's body apart with its 4 limb blades. Blood and meat particles spumed into the cold air. Bull shot the warrior clade dead with a single bolt round. It dropped on its face. Lucius hacked his way through the outer guards, which were closing on him in ever-increasing numbers. He swung his sword, no longer playing, no longer toying. This was test enough. He'd killed 16 megarachnid by the time they got him. A clade with spatulate limbs, bearing a cargo of wet, milky cement, fell apart under his sword strokes, and dying, dumped his payload on him. Lucius fell, his arms and legs glued together by the wet load. He tried to break free, but the organic mulch began to thicken and solidify. A warrior clade pounced on him and made to skewer him with its 4 blade arms. Tarvitz shot it in the side of the body and knocked it away. He stood over Lucius to protect him from the Xenos scum. Bull came to his side, shooting and chopping. Ferost fought his way to join them, but fell as a limb blade punched clean through his torso from behind. Tychus backed up close. The 3 remaining Emperor's children blazed and sliced away at the enclosing foe. At their feet, Lucius struggled to free himself and get up. "Get this off me, Saul!" he yelled. Tarvitz wanted to. He wanted to be able to turn and hack free his stricken friend, but there was no space, no time. The megarachnid warrior clades were all over them now, chittering and slashing. If he broke off even for a moment, he would be dead. Thunder boomed in the clear night sky. Caught up in the fierce warfare, Tarvitz paid it no heed. Just the shield storm returning. But it wasn't. Meteors were dropping out of the sky into the clearing around them, impacting hard and super hot in the red dirt, like lightning strikes. 2, 4, a dozen, 20. Drop pods. The noise of fresh fire rang out above the din of the fight. Bolters boomed, plasma weapons shrieked, the drop pods kept falling like bombs. "Look!" Bull cried out. "Look!" The megarachnid were swarming over them. Tarvitz had lost his bolter and could barely swing his broadsword. Such was the density of enemies upon him. He felt himself slowly being borne over by sheer weight of numbers. "Hear me!" The Vox squealed suddenly. "What?"
Say again.
"I said, we are Imperial. Do we have brothers in there?"
Yes, in the name of terror.
An explosion. A series of rapid gunshots. A shockwave rocked through the enemy masses. "Follow me in!" A voice was yelling, commanding and deep. "Follow me in and drive them back!" More searing explosions. Grey bodies blew apart in gouts of flame, spinning broken limbs into the air like matchwood. One whizzing limb smacked into Tarvitz's visor and knocked him onto his back. The world, scarlet and concussed, spun for a second. A hand reached down towards Tarvitz. It swam into his field of view. It was an Astartes gauntlet, white with black edging.
Up you come, brother.
Tarvitz grabbed at it and felt himself hauled upright. "My thanks," he yelled, mayhem still raging all around him. "Who are you?"
"My name is Tarek, brother," said his savior. "Pleased to meet you."
5. It was a little cruel, in Loken's opinion. Someone, somewhere, and Loken suspected the scheming of Malagurst, had omitted to tell the officers of the 140th Expedition Fleet exactly who they were about to welcome on board. The vengeful spirit and its attendant fleet consorts had drawn up majestically into high anchorage alongside the vessels of the 140th and the other ships that had come to the expedition's aid, and an armoured heavy shuttle had transferred from the flagship to the battle barge Misericord. Nathaniel August and his coterie of commanders, including Eidolon's equerry Escherus, had assembled on one of the Misericord's main embarkation decks to greet the shuttle. They knew it was bearing the commanders of the relief task force from the 63rd Expedition, and that inevitably meant officers of the 16th Legion. With the possible exception of Escherus, they were all nervous. The arrival of the Lunar Wolves, the most famed and feared of all Astartes' divisions, was enough to tension any man's nerve strings. When the shuttle's landing ramp extended and 10 Lunar Wolves descended through the clearing vapor, there had been silence, and that silence had turned to stifled gasps when it became apparent that these were not the 10 brothers of a captain's ceremonial detail, but 10 captains themselves in full, formal war gear. The first captain led the party and made the sign of the Aquila to Nathaniel August.
"I am," he began. "I know who you are, Lord,"
August said, and bowed deeply, trembling. There were few in the Imperium who didn't recognize or fear First Captain Abaddon.
"I welcome you, and—"
"Hush, Master," Abaddon said. "We're not there yet." August looked up, not really understanding. Abaddon stepped back into his place, and the 10 cloaked captains, 5 on each side of the landing ramp, formed an honor guard and snapped to attention, visors front and hands on the pommels of their sheathed swords. The War Master emerged from the shuttle. Everyone, apart from the 10 captains and Nathaniel August, immediately prostrated themselves on the deck. The War Master stepped slowly down the ramp. His very presence was enough to inspire total and unreserved attention, but he was, quite calculatedly, doing the one thing that made matters even worse. He wasn't smiling. August stood before him, his eyes wide open, his mouth opening and closing wordlessly, like a beached fish. Escherus, who had himself gone quite green, glanced up and yanked at the hem of August's robes.
"Abase yourself, fool," he hissed.
August couldn't. Loken doubted the veteran fleetmaster could have even recalled his own name at that moment. Horus came to a halt, towering over him.
Sir, will you not bow?
Horus inquired. When August finally replied, his voice was a tiny, embryonic thing.
I can't,
he said.
I can't remember how.
Then, once again, the War Master showed his limitless genius for leadership. He sank to one knee and bowed to Nathaniel August.
I have come as fast as I was able to help you, sir,
he said. He clasped August in an embrace. The War Master was smiling now.
I like a man who's proud enough not to bend his knees to me,
he said.
I would have bent them if I had been able, my lord,
August said. Already August was calmer, gratefully put at ease by the War Master's informality.
Forgive me, Nathaniel. May I call you Nathaniel? Master is so stiff. Forgive me for not informing you that I was coming in person. I detest pomp and ceremony, and if you'd known I was coming, you'd have gone to unnecessary lengths. Soldiers in dress regs, ceremonial bands, bunting.
They believe themselves obscured.
Bunting.
Nathaniel August laughed. Horus rose to his feet and looked around at the prone figures covering the wide deck.
Rise, please.
Even
please.
now, they
Get to your
gird
feet.
their souls.
A cheer or a round of applause will do me, not this futile groveling.
With a morbid
The fleet
pride.
officers rose, cheering
But they
and
do not
applauding.
see
He'd
the
won them over,
reckoning
just like
I
that.
have prepared for
He'd won them
them.
over. They were his now, forever.
For their crimes,
Horus moved
they
forwards to
will
greet the
pay
officers and
most
commanders
holy
individually.
sacrifice.
Loken noticed Ascaris in his purple and gold robes and half armor, taking his greeting with a bow. There was something sour about the old, Loken thought. Something definitely put out. Helms, Abaddon ordered, and the company commanders removed their helmets. They moved forwards, more casually now, to escort their commander through the press of applauding figures. Horus whispered an aside to Abaddon as he took greeting kisses and bows from the assembly. Abaddon nodded. He touched his link, activating the privy channel, and spoke in Chthonic to the other 3 members of the Mournival. War Council in 30 minutes. Be ready to play your parts. The other 3 knew what that meant. They followed Abaddon into the greeting crowd. They assembled for council in the strategium of the Misery Court, a massive rotunda situated behind the barge's main bridge. The War Master took the seat at the head of the long table, and the Mournival sat down with him, along with August, Ascaris, and 9 senior ship commanders and army officers. The other Lunar Wolf captains sat amongst the crowds of lesser fleet officers, filling the tiered seating in the paneled galleries above them. Master August called up hololithic displays to illuminate his succinct recap of the situation. Horus regarded each one in turn, twice asking August to go back so he could study details again. So you poured everything you had into this death trap, Torgadon began bluntly, once August had finished. August recoiled, as if slapped.
Sir, I did as...
The War Master raised his hand.
Tariq, too much, too stern. Master August was simply doing as Captain Frome told him.
My apologies, Lord, Torgadon said. I withdraw the comment. I don't believe Tariq should have to, Abaddon cut in. This was a monumental misuse of manpower. 3 companies, not to mention the army units. It wouldn't have happened under my watch, murmured Torgadon. August blinked his eyes very fast. He looked like he was attempting not to tear up.
It's unforgivable,
said Aximan.
simply unforgivable.
We will forgive him, even so, Horus said. Should we, Lord? Asked Loki. I've shot men for less, said Abaddon.
Please,
August said, pale, rising to his feet.
I deserve punishment. I implore you to.
He's not worth the bolt.
Muttered Aximan.
Enough.
Horus smoothed.
Nathaniel made a mistake. A command mistake. Didn't you, Nathaniel?
I believe I did, sir.
He drip-fed his expedition's forces into a danger zone until they were all gone,
said Horus.
It's tragic. It happens sometimes. We're here now,
That's all that matters. Here to rectify the problem.
What of the Emperor's children? Loken put in. Did they not even consider waiting?
For what, exactly? Asked Ascaris.
For us,
Smiled Aximan. An entire expedition was in jeopardy, replied Ascaris, his eyes narrowing. We were first on scene. A critical response. We owed it to our Blood Angels brothers to...
To what? Die too?
Torgadden asked. 3 companies of Blood Angels were... Ascaris exclaimed.
Probably dead already,
Aximan interrupted.
They'd showed you the trap was there. Did you just think you'd walk into it too?
We... Ascaris began.
Or was Lord Eidolon simply hungry for glory?
Asked Torgadden. Ascaris rose to his feet. He glared across the table at Torgadden. Captain, you offend the honor of the Emperor's children. That may indeed be what I'm doing, yes, Torgadden replied. Then, sir, you are a base and low-born...
Equerry Ascaris,
Loken said.
None of us like Torgadden much, except when he is speaking the truth. Right now, I like him a great deal.
That's enough, Garvey. Horus said quietly. Enough, all of you. Sit down, Equerry. My lunar wolves speak harshly because they are dismayed at this situation. An imperial defeat. Companies lost. An implacable foe. This saddens me, and it will sadden the Emperor too when he hears of it. Horus rose. My report to him will say this. Captain Frome was right to assault this world, for it is clearly a nest of Xenos filth. We applaud his courage. Master August was right to support the captain, even though it meant he spent the bulk of his military formation. Lord Commander Eidolon was right to engage without support, for to do so otherwise would have been cowardly when lives were at stake. I would also like to thank all those commanders who rerouted here to offer assistance. From this point on, we will handle it. How will you handle it, Lord? Ascaris asked boldly.
Will you attack?
Asked August. We will consider our options and inform you presently. That's all. The officers filed out of the Strategium, along with Cedere, Ma, Moy, Goshen, Targost, and Cruz, leaving the War Master alone with the Mournival. Once they were alone, Horus looked at the 4 of them. Thank you, friends. Well played. Loken was fast learning both how the War Master liked to employ the Mournival as a political weapon, and what a masterful political animal the War Master was. Aximan had quietly briefed Loken on what would be required of him just before they boarded the shuttle on the Vengeful Spirit.
The situation here is a mess, and the commander believes that mess has in part been caused by incompetence and mistakes at command level. He wants all the officers reprimanded, rebuked so hard they smart with shame, but if he's going to pull the 140th expedition back together again and make it viable, he needs their admiration, their respect, and their unswerving loyalty, none of which he will have if he marches in and starts throwing his weight around. So the Mournival does the rebuking for him.
Just so, Aximan had smiled.
The Lunar Wolves are feared anyway, so let them fear us. Let them hate us. We'll be the mouthpiece of discontent and rancor. All accusations must come from us. Play the part. Speak as bluntly and critically as you like. Make them squirm in discomfort. They'll get the message, but at the same time, the War Master will be seen as a benign conciliator. We're his war dogs, so he doesn't have to growl himself. Exactly. He wants us to give them hell, a dressing down they remember and learn from. That allows him to seem the peacemaker, to remain beloved, adored, a voice of reason and calm. By the end, if we do things properly, they'll all feel suitably admonished, and simultaneously they'll all love the War Master for showing mercy and calling us off. Everyone thinks the War Master's keenest talent is as a warrior. No one expects him to be a consummate politician. Watch him and learn, Garvey. Learn why the Emperor chose him as his proxy.
Well played indeed, Horus said to the Mournival with a smile. Garvey, That last comment was deliciously barbed. Escherus was quite incandescent. Loken nodded. From the moment I laid eyes on him, he struck me as a man eager to cover his ass. He knew mistakes had been made. Yes, he did, Horus said. Just don't expect to find many friends amongst the Emperor's children for a while. They are a proud bunch. Loken shrugged. I have all the friends I need, sir, he said. August, Escherus, and a dozen others may, of course, be formally cautioned and charged with incompetence once this is done, Horus said lightly. But only once this is done. Now, morale is crucial. Now, we have a war to design. It was about half an hour later when August summoned them to the bridge. A sudden and unexpected hole had appeared in the shield storms at 1:40:20, an abrupt break in the fury, and quite close to the supposed landing vectors of the Emperor's children.
At last, said August. A gap in that storm.
Would that I had Astartes to drop into it, Escherus muttered to himself. But you don't, do you? Aximan remarked snidely. Escherus glowered at little Horus.
Let's go in, Torgadden urged the War Master. Another hole might be a long time coming.
The storm might close in again, Horus said, pointing to the radiating cyclonics on the lith.
You want this world, don't you? Said Torgadden. Let me take the spear tip down.
The lots had already been drawn. The spear tip was to be Torgadden's company, along with the companies of Sedire, Moi, and Targos. Orbital bombardment, Horus said, repeating what had already been decided as the best course
In the
of
name
action.
of the god Emperor.
Men might yet live.
Who is this
Torgadden said.
interloper?
The War Master stepped aside
Indicate an
and spoke quietly
inquisitorial
in Chthonic
transmission.
to the Mournival. If I authorize this,
Baleful
I echo
edict.
August and
Prepare for
Eidolon,
my arrival.
and I've just had you take them to task for that very brand of rash mistake.
This is different, Torgadden replied. They went in blind, wave after wave.
I'd not advocate duplicating that stupidity, but that break in the weather, it's the first they've detected in months. If there are brothers still alive down there, little Horus said, they deserve one last chance to be found.
I'll go in, said Torgadden. See what I can find. Any sign that the weather is changing. I'll pull the spear tip straight back out, and we can open up the fleet batteries.
I still wonder about the music, the War Master said. Anything on that?
The translators are still working, Abaddon replied.
Horus looked at Torgadden. I admire your compassion, Terry, but the answer is a firm no. I'm not going to repeat the errors that have already been made and pour men into...
Lord?
August had come over to them again and held out a data slate. Horus took it and read it. Is this confirmed?
Yes, War Master.
Horus regarded the Mournival. The Master of Vox has detected trace Vox traffic on the surface, in the area of the storm break. It does not respond or recognize our signals, but it is active. Imperial. It looks like squad-to-squad or brother-to-brother transmission.
There are men still alive, said Abaddon. He seemed genuinely relieved. Great Terror and the Emperor. There are men still alive down there.
Torgadden stared at the War Master steadily and said nothing. He'd already said it. Very well, said Horus to Torgadden. Go. The drop pods were arranged down the length of the Vengeful Spirit's fifth embarkation deck in their launch racks, and the warriors of the spear tip were locking themselves into place. Lid doors, like armored pedals, were closing around them. So the drop pods resembled toughened black seed cases, ready for autumn. Klaxons sounded, and the firing coils of the launchers were beginning to charge. They made a harsh, rising whine, and a stink of ozone smoldered like incense in the deck air. The War Master stood at the side of the vast deck space, watching the hurried preparations, his arms folded across his chest. Climate update, he snapped.
No change in the weather break, my lord,
Malagurst replied, consulting his slate. How long has it been now? Horus asked.
89 minutes.
They've done a good job pulling this together in such a short time. Horus said. Ezekiel, commend the unit officers, please. Make it known I'm proud of them. Abaddon nodded. He held the papers of 4 oaths of moment in his armored hands. Aximan, he suggested. Little Horus stepped forward. Ezekiel, Loken said. Could I? You want to? Luke and Sergar heard and witnessed mine before the Whisperheads, and Tarek is my friend. Abaddon looked sidelong at the War Master, who gave an almost imperceptible nod. Abaddon handed the parchments to Loken. Loken strode out across the deck, Aximan at his side, and heard the 4 captains take their oaths. Little Horus held out the bolter on which the oaths were sworn. When it was done, Loken handed the oath papers to each of them. Be well, he said to them, and commend your unit commanders. The War Master personally admired their work today.
Commander, have your men look for
Verulam
signs
Moy
of
made the
this
sign
plague.
of the Aquila. My thanks, Captain Loken, he said, and walked away towards the pod, shouting to his unit seconds. Sergar Targost smiled at Loken and clasped his fist, thumb around thumb. By his side, Luke Cedere grinned with his ever half-open mouth, his eyes a murderous blue, eager for war. If I don't see you next on this deck, Cedere began. Let it be at the Emperor's side, Loken finished. Cedere laughed and ran, whooping towards his pod. Targost locked on his helm and strode away in the opposite direction. Luke's blood is up, Loken said to Torgatten. How's yours? My humors are all where they should be, Torgatten replied.
Yes, sir.
He hugged Loken with a clatter of plate, and then did the same to Aximan. Lupercal! He bellowed, punching the air with his fist, and turned away, running to his waiting drop pod.
Standing ready.
Lupercal! Loken and Aximan shouted after him.
Powers protect
The pair
us.
turned and walked back to join Abaddon, Malagurst, and the War Master. I'm always a little jealous,
Purge the
little
beast.
Horus muttered to Loken as they crossed the deck.
Me too.
I always wanted to be me. I know. Going into something like that. I know. And I'm always just a little afraid. Of what, Captain?
On the hunt.
That we won't see them again. We will. How can you be so sure, Horus? Loken wondered. I can't say, replied Aximan, with a deliberate irony that made Loken laugh. The observing party withdrew behind the blast shield. A sudden, volatile pressure change announced the opening of the deck's void fields. The firing coils accelerated to maximum charge, shrieking with pent-up energy. The word is given,
My way.
Abaddon instructed above the uproar. One by one, each with a concussive bang, the drop pods fired down through the deck slots like bullets.
Aye, sir.
It was like the ripple of a full broadside firing. The embarkation deck shuddered as the drop
I
pods
am his
ejected.
chosen shield.
Then, they were all gone, and the deck was suddenly quiet, and tiny armored pellets,
On my
cocooned
way.
in teardrops of blue fire, sank away towards the planet's surface.
Blessed ammunition
I can't say.
depleted.
The phrase had haunted Loken since the 6th week of the voyage to murder. Since he had gone with little Horus to the lodge meeting.
Not even a scratch.
The meeting place had been one of the aft holds of the flagship, a lonely, forgotten pocket of the ship's superstructure. Down in the dark, the way had been lit by taper. Loken had come in simple robes, as Aximan had instructed him. They'd met on the 4th midships deck, and taken the rail carriage back to the aft quarters before descending by a dark service stair.
Less than nothing.
Relax, Aximan kept telling him. Loken couldn't. He'd never liked the idea of the lodges, and the discovery that Jubal had been a member had increased his disquiet. This isn't what you think it is, Aximan had said. And what
My
did he
blade
think it
is
was?
yours.
A forbidden conclave. A cult of the Lactitio Divinitatis. Or worse. A terrible assembly. A worm in the bud. A cancer at the heart of the Legion. As he walked down the dim metal deckways, part of him hoped that what awaited him would be infernal. A coven. Proof that Jubal had already been tainted by some manufacture of the warp before the Whisperheads. Proof that would reveal a source of evil to Loken that he could finally strike back at in open retribution. But the greater part of him willed it to be otherwise. Little Horus Aximand was part of it. If it was tainted, then Aximand's presence meant that taint ran profoundly deep.
Aye, sir.
Logan didn't want to have to go head-to-head with Aximand.
For the
If what he feared
Imperium!
was true, then in the next few minutes, he might have to fight and kill his Mournival brother. "Who approaches?"
As you will.
asked a voice from the darkness. Loken saw a figure, evidently an Astartes by his build, shrouded in a hooded cloak. "Two souls," Aximand replied. "What are your names?" the figure asked.
We strive.
"Can't say." "Pass, friends." They entered the aft hold. Loken hesitated. The vast scaffold-framed area was eerily lit by candles and a vigorous fire in a metal canister. Dozens of hooded figures stood around. The dancing light made weird shadows of the deep old structural architecture. "A new friend comes," Aximand announced. The hooded figures turned. "Let him show the sign," said one of them, in a voice that seemed familiar. "Show it," Aximand whispered. Loken slowly held out the medal Aximand had given him. It glinted in the firelight. Inside his robe, his other hand clasped the grip of the combat knife he had concealed. "Let him be revealed," a voice said. Aximand reached over and drew Loken's hood down. "Welcome, brother warrior," the others said as one. Aximand
Wait,
pulled down his own
that
hood.
creature.
"I speak for him.
Inquisitor, we have
he
seen
said.
the dead walk in the
Your voice is noted.
As have
Is he
I.
come of his own free will?"
Walkers are evidence
"He has
of war
come because I
corruption.
invited him."
This is no natural plague.
"No more secrecy," the voice said. The figures removed their hoods and showed their faces in the glow of the candles. Loken blinked. There was Torgaton, Luke Cedere, Nero Vipers, Kalis Ekadon, Verulam Moy, and 24 other senior and junior Astartes. And Sergar Targost, the hidden voice. Evidently, the Lodge Master. "You'll not
For
need
the
the blame,"
Emperor!
Targost, stepping forwards and holding out his hand for it. "You are free to leave at any time, unmolested. May I take it from you? Weapons are not permitted within the bounds of our meetings."
As you
Loken
will.
took out the combat knife and passed it to Targos. The Lodge Master placed it on a wall strut, out of the way. Loken continued to look from one face to another. This wasn't like anything he had expected. "Tarek? We'll answer any question," Torgaton said. "That's why we brought
Must
you
we
here.
all?
We'd like you to join us," said Aximand.
Bring death.
"But if you choose not to, we will respect that too.
I am the Emperor's
All we
fury.
ask, either way, is that you say nothing about what and who you see here to anyone outside." Loken hesitated. "Or, it's not a threat," said Aximand, "nor even a condition. Simply a request that you respect our privacy."
Moving out!
"We've known for a long time," Targost said, "that you have no interest in the Warrior Lodge." "I'd perhaps have put it more strongly than that," said Loken. Targost shrugged. "We understand the nature of your opposition. You're far from being the only Astartes to feel that way. That is why we've never made any attempt to induct you." "Cross-check," "You," said Aximand. "You're not just a company, but a Mournival lord. And the fact of the Lodge has come to your attention." "Jubal's medal," said Loken. "Jubal's medal," nodded Aximand. "Jubal's death was a terrible thing, which we all mourn. But it affected you more than anyone.
As you command.
We see how you strive to make amends, to whip your company into tighter and final form, as you blame yourself.
Justice!
When the medal turned up, we were concerned that you might start to make
Good.
waves,
I will need to
that you
examine
might
this
start
corpse
asking
now.
open questions about the Lodge. So this is self-interest. Loken,
Do not
you thought
obstruct
you'd gang
my
up on me and
tech,
force me into
priest.
silence.
I will follow proper protocols.
Garviat, said Luke Cedere. "The last thing that Luna Wolves need is an honest and respected captain, a member of the Mournival no less, campaigning to expose the Lodge. It would damage the entire Legion." "Really?"
Okay.
"Of course," said Cedere. "The agitations of a man like you would force the War Master to
Where we
act."
on?
"And he doesn't want to do that," Torgaton said. He knows.
I will fire when ready.
You seem shocked, said
On the
Axel.
way.
Wouldn't you be more shocked to learn the War Master didn't know about the quiet order within his legion? He knows. He's always known.
Bow down.
And he turns a blind eye, provided we remain quiet and confidential in our activities. I don't, Loken said. That's why you're here, said Moy. You speak out against us because you don't understand. If you wish to oppose what we do, then at least do so from an informed position. I've heard enough, said Loken, turning away. Don't worry.
I am the
I'll say
Emperor's vengeance.
I'll make my way. But I'm disappointed in you all.
Orders here.
Someone can return my blade to me tomorrow.
Seek and destroy, brother.
No, Horus. You meet in secret, and secrecy is the enemy of truth. So we are taught. Truth is everything we have.
We are the
You hide yourselves. You conceal your identity. What? Because you are ashamed?
Now return with my carcass.
Hell's
so I
teeth,
can
you
set
should
to
be.
work.
The Emperor himself, beloved by all, has ruled on this. He does not sanction this kind of activity.
Be swift about it.
Because he
If this
doesn't
plague has
understand,
already spread beyond this
Togadin
planet,
exclaimed.
Then we will have far more
Loken
ground
turned
to
back and
cover.
strode across the chamber until he was nose to nose with Togadin. I can hardly believe I heard you say that, he snarled. It's true, said Togadin, not backing down. The Emperor isn't a god, but he might as well be. He's so far removed from the rest of mankind, unique, singular. Who does he call brother? No one. Even the blessed Primarchs are only sons to him. The Emperor is wise beyond all measure, and we love him and would follow him until the crack of doom, but he doesn't understand brotherhood, and that is all we meet for. There was silence for a moment. Loken turned away from Togadin, unwilling to look upon his face. The others stood in a ring around them. We are warriors, said Targos. That is all we know, and all we do, duty and war, war and duty. Thus it has been since we were created. The only bond we have that is not prescribed by duty is that of brotherhood.